Hi folks, so the title of my last video, which was Make Hay, I really should have titled it, and I'll go back and change it, Make Hay While the Sun Does Not Shine. But then over the past couple of days when I was thinking about this particular video, which I really wanted to do day before yesterday, and then yesterday, but couldn't because it was raining and I like to do them outside. And sometimes it's okay to wait just to see how things are developing, so as you feel like you're getting a sense of what's going on, just to wait and see how things are developing outside. So I thought that video would be titled Make Hay, and this one would be titled When the Sun Does Not Shine, because I wanted to talk in greater detail about some of the transits I referenced in that Make Hay video that are in astrological circles being held responsible for the coronavirus outbreak, but are also functioning on a personal level. So it makes sense to focus on them now because they're here and they're important transits, certainly important transits for 2020. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought it very much correlates to the idea that I've mentioned in previous videos, that there's a forest fire in the sign of Capricorn. So here I'm going to talk in terms of this forest fire concept. In the sign of Capricorn, we've had the South Node, so eclipses of release taking place since, gosh, July of 2018, if not July 2018, but maybe been felt much more acutely since January 2019. We've had the planet Saturn here since December 20th, 2017, give or take a day. We've had Pluto here for a while. We have some heavy hitters here. And certainly I think it makes sense to look at it from the time Saturn entered Capricorn. So does it help to know where Capricorn is in your chart? Absolutely, so that you have a sense of where it is that these energies have been at work. But it's one part of your chart where the eclipses of release have been occurring, there's also been a need to exercise a certain amount of discipline, propriety, learn about patterns and boundaries, learn more about yourself, learn about self-defeating behaviors and patterns that are getting in your way, that sabotage your success or the fulfillment of your potential. And Saturn is, wherever Saturn is, it's there to teach you about the fulfillment of your potential, to make you work hard. And it's been this great mystery in the sign of Saturn with regard to what needs to be released while you're still working hard at the same time. Because typically when we get eclipses of release in a part of the chart, the idea is to quit working so hard at holding on to things. But the energy has been complicated in Capricorn. And when we think about it, the idea of releasing something and the idea of being aware of self-defeating and patterns and behaviors becomes helpful, because the idea that these self-defeating patterns and behaviors need to be released become even more pronounced. And the eclipse cycle we are in right now, that started on December the 24th, and where February 24th, the week before, week after, played an important role, and where the week before and after May the 4th will play an important role, and then July the 4th will play an important role. The eclipse cycle that we're in with these dates is very much that idea of release. And this is the final year in which at least three of these entities, the South Node, the last of these eclipses, as I said, is on July the 4th, Saturn and Jupiter will leave in December. So when I've talked in previous videos about there being a forest fire in Capricorn, or forest fire has been there at least since December 2017, and this is the year when the forest fire is quelled, but shoots of green start to appear finally. This particularly is an important time. The planet Mars, the planet of action and drive, entered Capricorn. I'll explain in a second how this applies on a global basis. The planet of Mars entered Capricorn, gosh, I want to say the middle of February, and is here till the end of March. And so, you know, not only did Mars enter close to the February 24th date, about the week before, but it's here till the end of March, so a certain amount of action, activity needs to be taken. Now, I do have one client who's asked me repeatedly what's going on with the sign of Capricorn because she may not be feeling it, and I would argue we have plenty of dates when we feel eclipses. I also have another client who talked about the fact that, who brought up something that to me indicates very much that he is feeling the Capricorn eclipses now. And I said to him, I would have expected this to show up last year, but it's showing up now. You know, not only do we have 4 dates that I've mentioned this year related to the Capricorn eclipse, we had 4 dates last year. January 4th or 5th, May 4th or 5th, January 4th or 5th, March 4th or 5th, May the 16th and July the 16th as important dates in 2019 where the eclipse could have been felt the week before, the week after. So we have plenty of time, and certainly for all clients, generally speaking, I can pinpoint relatively easily what's been going on wherever Capricorn sits in that chart, which house Capricorn occupies, certainly since December of 2017. So whether this is applying to you in a really intense or strict way or not, just hear it out, because for those people to whom this idea of releasing self-defeating behaviors and patterns, and at the same time releasing self-defeating patterns and behaviors, and at the same time paying attention to what the eclipses are revealing, and also taking advantage, as I said in my last video, of some of the delays that are currently upon us to make hay in certain areas while the sun is not shining. All of that kind of comes together. A meditation on what needs to be released, and the fact that action can be taken in other areas while things are being pushed out. For example, the tax deadline. I believe, listen, consult with your tax advisors in the United States. That's who I'm talking about right now, to figure out what your tax deadline is. I don't want to be held, whatever space we're being given right now, I don't want to be held responsible for giving you any kind of financial advice. It's up to you to figure out what's going on in your cases and taking it from there. But the bottom line is there's certain delays, both in the professional sphere that of course will impact the personal sphere, that may give you a breathing room to take care of certain things, emptying out boxes. I mean, it doesn't have to be big dramatic stuff, but there's a bit of a load that can be lightened in other areas. So certainly think about that too. Not everyone who's working from home has an easy time of it. If you have childcare involved, or frankly, if your workload hasn't really changed and you still have to make your meetings and you still have to make your deadlines and if you still have to work on your deliverables, but still. Okay. Self-defeating patterns and behaviors and boundaries and lessons around how to fulfill your potential by grappling with these and doing some of the hard work that Saturn has asked you to do. Doing the work that Pluto requires while it's been in Capricorn, where death and transformation of a certain kind occurs without your being able to control it. The eclipses of release joining in at least in January of 2019, if not in July 2018. And here we are in 2020, when with Mars's entry into Capricorn in the middle of February, we have some important transits coming up now. As far as the virus is concerned, the general astrological consensus seems to be, and I'm always very wary of things that happen that then we as the astrological community go back and try and figure out after the fact, because the question is, why didn't we see it coming? And as I explained in my last video, if there's anyone on this planet who is strong enough diviner that they know exactly what is coming, and if you really know exactly what's going to happen to your life, let me know, because the world would look like a very different place. But outside of that, you know, sometimes when people die suddenly, or Princess Diana passed away and there was this flurry of, oh, it's all there in her chart, and then the question is, well, why don't we see it then, you know? Keep your hands on the wheel of your life. And if you find that you're spending hours on YouTube looking at astrology and tarot videos, ask yourself whether you just need a break and you need to recharge, or you need to be inspired, or if it's become a long-standing habit. Ask yourself if it's a bit of an addiction and you need to take back control and action and agency in your life. I say this as a YouTube astrologer. Always be skeptical, always test readings. Now, coming back to the virus and the planets involved. Mars is a planet of action. Let's talk about this working out in a public global realm first, and then I'll come back to the private. Because it really does seem like, especially this week, things are going to become more intense before they become better. In the last video, the Make Hay video, I explained, and the question about things becoming more intense, the first of the transits, Mars conjuncting Jupiter. Jupiter and Pluto are very close to each other. And Mars is very close to Jupiter, and then it's going to be close to Pluto and Saturn. And all these 4 planets are very, very close to each other. Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn. And so while the conjunctions that I'm going to bring up happen between March the 20th and about April the 4th, in the span of a 2-week time frame, the question is whether we've already felt the worst of it already. And I mean in the last week and a half in a certain sense. Although if you look at these transits, one could argue that they've been in place since about January the 12th. And when you look at when the virus came up, one could make an argument and say, okay, so then it may very well be these transits that are creating this as an issue, or that are indicating this as an issue. Take it or leave it. Certainly this is the quote-unquote calamity week. And certainly in the States we're experiencing it that way. I again remain skeptical about stuff like this because other countries and other geographies have experienced it prior to that. So whatever that may mean. The bottom line is Mars is a planet of action and drive, but it can also be a planet of wounding, of rashness, of injury, of quarrels, of conflict. Jupiter, for me, always is a planet of endings and new beginnings. Some astrologers believe that whatever Jupiter touches, or whatever comes in contact with Jupiter, is expanded. I remain skeptical. By the same token, they say when Saturn touches a planet, it contracts. Now, I understand what this means on a certain level, insofar as Jupiter is considered conventionally more fortunate and lucky, so expansiveness becomes a word in that context, and Saturn requires discipline and hard work, and so contraction becomes a word that's used. So if Saturn is conjuncting your Venus, your relationships and your financial situation possibly will undergo a test. If Jupiter conjuncts Venus, then your relationships and your financial situation may expand. And I say may because I think these kinds of generalities are very tricky in a personal chart. Pluto is a planet of death and transformation. Period. Dot. No control. Pluto comes in, it transforms what it's going to transform. Burns down the barn so you can see the moon. That quote, wherever it comes from. And Saturn, as we've already mentioned, is the planet of discipline and rigor and hard work and tightening the belt and getting serious and focusing on your skills and your discipline and hard work to get something done, and focusing on behaviors and patterns that don't suit you or that aren't serving you. Relationships, boundaries. So when Mars now is going to conjunct all these planets, the planet of action is going to conjunct all these planets. On the one hand, on a personal level, it gives us a lot of drive to implement certain things in the sign of Capricorn that we have been wanting to implement in a while. So it gives us a certain, and Mars is very achievement oriented in Capricorn. It gives us the ability to finally make certain changes that we may have been thinking about and that have been increasing in intensity, but we may have been thinking about since December 2017 on some level, gradually, more increasingly. So if, for example, the Capricorn is in your 6th house of health and routines, and if you've been meaning to take some actions to improve your diet or improve your exercise or go see a doctor or change your routine or become more productive, this may be the time when it gets implemented in a really solid way that takes. As I've said, Mars can be a little tricky in these cases generally, so this could also be a time where if you're really going to lose it at someone, especially with the Mars-Pluto transit, it can be pretty transforming. So I would say just be careful. Make note of it. Take action. Respond. Don't react. Respond. Don't react, especially with Mars, if you can help it. But sometimes, like with a full moon, pay attention to what you want to change. Mars might give you the energy to do so. On a more global level, what is being said on a certain level is that Mars' presence here, but particularly the Jupiter-Pluto transit, expanding death and transformation, is what is creating some of the current issues. Here's how I believe this translates to us. Certainly it doesn't seem like the virus is going away for a while for those geographies that are affected by it. And certainly currently it seems like whatever is coming up from a healing perspective, while it's accelerated, is not going to be here tomorrow or even next week or even the week after that. At the same time, astrologically, I feel confident in saying this. it is a time of forward movement. And it may be time to make hay while the sun does not shine. Now, for some people, this may be, what the hell are you talking about? I don't know how I'm going to make my rent. In which case, making hay may involve taking a look at what resources are there and what sort of help is being made available to people. This will not apply to everyone, unfortunately, and I'm sorry about that. But it might bring the capacity to try and figure out, in certain cases, whether things can be changed in such a way that work to your benefit in the slightly longer term. I don't know. I'm not in your shoes. I may need to be in your shoes if I find, people getting astrology readings, it's people's discretionary income. So I may be challenged to do some thinking as well. The making hay component and taking action component very much has to do currently with the sign of Pisces and where Pisces sits in your chart. I mentioned this the last time. So if you have a sense of that and what house that occupies, and I have mentioned that there's a correlation between crises in late 2015 and 2016, something needing to be released at that point in time, and last March and April, and here again now, where certain actions, particularly in the form of communication and transacting and writing and speaking and interacting, may, till about April the 10th, take on some prominence. Now, we're not done with Pisces. Mars is going to be out of Capricorn at the end of March in Aquarius, and then in the middle of May it's going to move into Pisces. So this Pisces part of the chart remains active and activated. But Mars and Jupiter, the planet of action and expansion, if I'm going to use conventional terms, come together on March the 20th. Mars then conjuncts Pluto, the planet of action, with the planet of death and transformation on March the 23rd. Mars then conjuncts Saturn, the planet of contraction and discipline, on March the 31st. And then on April the 4th, Jupiter conjuncts Pluto, the planet of expansion with death and transformation. So it could very well be that some of the things, if we're really going to look at these transits as defining the virus on a global level, then it could be that here's where we're feeling most of the impact. The first of the conjunctions outside of all of this that was relevant is Saturn conjuncting Pluto on January the 12th. And as I've always maintained, it's not the day when something happens, it's the days leading up to it. And Saturn and Pluto are both slow-moving planets, so it's possible that insofar as the virus came up in December, it somehow has a link to all of this. What the overarching meaning and I think there will be probably a lot to meditate on, and continues to be a lot to meditate on with regard to overall global meanings and learnings to be derived from this. But the idea, at least astrologically, what I can say is this week continues to be intense. It's leading up to the new moon in Aries on March the 24th, which is so interesting. The new moons and the full moons we've had recently have been interesting too. The last new moon in Pisces was conjunct to Mercury retrograde. And arguably, this was on February 23rd, 24th, it ushered in a 28-day period, which was Mercury retrograde-like. People had to be quarantined in different geographies. People had to stay home. There was less to do. You were forced to put up your feet. There was confusion. We're still in the shadow of this lunation because the next new moon is on the 24th of April, 24th of March, in a few days' time. Then we had a full moon on the 8th of March that occurred when Mercury was stationary, because on the 9th of March, 10th of March, depending on where you were, was going direct. And we talked about that full moon as somehow being a pause, and we certainly have felt that pause. And it was almost as if the new moon in Pisces was like a full moon, and this full moon that we had in Virgo was like a new moon. And we covered all that in the last few videos. This particular new moon in Aries is fascinating. It is conjunct close to Chiron, which stands for healing. One can only hope. I don't think it's immediately going to bring very much. My hope is that maybe tests will be available so that we can at least get a sense of how many people are affected, so that the quarantining and flattening the curve becomes more effective, but remains to be seen. Does it usher in a 4-week period where we start, the curve turns towards healing? I can only hope. One thing about Chiron, though, you can only heal when you have a wound, and by healing you have to sit inside the wound. Now with Chiron, as astrologers, we really interpret it much more from a familial place, from a long-standing psychic or emotional wounding place. And the way to heal it is to sit with it and to learn from it, to experience it, and to spiral out of it and to heal it. And typically, the healing occurs by your Chiron return at around the age of 50. Now, none of that is directly going to apply to this scenario, but my hope is that insofar as the last new moon and full moon have behaved pretty literally, insofar as the planets they've been conjunct or aspecting, my hope is that this one on the 24th, with the sun entering Aries on the 19th, and then having this new moon a few days later, my hope is that it does start to usher in a more spring-like feeling. And it does start to change the curve a little bit more towards healing. The Aries part of your chart, it also activates, which will be active in the second half of this year in a big way. But I'm going to leave that for my new moon video, which I'll do as we head towards the new moon or shortly after the new moon, as I like to do them. Just as a heads up, I don't tend to do my new moon videos before a new moon. So here we are. The other thing about this particular week, where I'm asking you to make hay, is that it is now turning into the week before a new moon. And so increasingly as we head towards the 24th, our own energy will subside. So for people who are feeling like it's a bit of a lockdown or quarantined, even if that word can't be used technically, in some ways, the timing of that energetically is not bad. Because in 2 or 3 days' time, your own sort of emotional and psychic energy or physical energy will feel more depleted. Indeed, the 48 hours before a new moon, particularly heading to it, can feel quite flat and quite depressed and quite mopey. You know, like don't have the energy to do anything, don't know what's going on, actually feeling even to the point of sadness. And then the new moon occurs and the energy comes back. So if we look at these transits, these forest fire transits, this final year of intense Capricorn energy transits, but the year that counts. If you have a Capricorn ascendant, if you have strong Capricorn placements, this is all the hard work that you've been doing, particularly since December 2017. This is what it's for. This is what it is about. This is what it's been leading up to this year. Now, interestingly, Saturn moves into Aquarius in a few days' time, on March the 23rd, I think, till the end of June, from Capricorn, but then back into Capricorn at the end of June to finish up where he has been since December 2017, and then leave with Jupiter within days of each other in December into Aquarius. So it really, and we're not going to get another Mars-like transit again. So action, energy, drive, firefighting in a positive personal sense. We're not going to have a transit like this in Capricorn again this year. And really, after this, the dates that become more important are the dates around the eclipse, the week before and after April the 4th, and then July the 4th, May the 4th, sorry, and then July the 4th. Another 2 dates that are important is that the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, the planet of expansion conjuncting the planet of death and transformation, happens 3 times. If this is Pluto and this is Jupiter, I'm being very rough because Pluto is going to go direct and retrograde, but Jupiter is moving forward, and on April the 4th, it conjuncts Pluto. It's in the same degree as Pluto. Then, of course, it moves forward. It goes retrograde in May, I believe May, the middle of May. Yeah, I think so. And then retouches Pluto as it goes retrograde back on June the 30th, when Saturn re-enters Capricorn. Fascinating. You can't make this stuff up. Then it goes retrograde, and then in September, if I recall correctly, it goes direct and re-meets up with Pluto on November the 12th. So if we're looking at the Jupiter-Pluto transit as somehow being indicative of the virus, then it may be something that is with us and is being processed through till November. I'm going to wait and see on that. But for me, the idea of the Jupiter-Pluto transit has to do with endings and new beginnings related to the sign of Capricorn that are powerful and transformative And for people with strong Capricorn placements, we all have Capricorn somewhere in our chart. So wherever the eclipses of release have been happening, wherever we've been asked to work hard, wherever it is that we may feel like we're implementing changes this week, making hay while the sun shines in a certain sense, even in the sign of Capricorn, while being encouraged to do so in the sign of Pisces. Making hay while the sun does not shine. Sorry. Literally not shining here for days. Then the Jupiter-Pluto transit is what is going to create and continue to encourage these green shoots to grow out of the forest fire and the barren landscape that has been Capricorn's due for a few years now. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about this that I want to say before I summarize. So, from a global pandemic perspective, if we're to believe anything that astrologers are scrambling to make sense of, it could be that the virus-related issues are here to stay through November. That's the least important part of what I feel like I want to say. I think what is more important is that this week, and this is already true, I mean, over the past few days, every day brings a greater development, at least for those of us here in the States, and maybe elsewhere too, but the developments. So this week is an intense week, certainly transit-wise. And then with the new moon in Aries, maybe the curve shifts more towards healing.